Welcome to the ultimate collection of engineering disasters. Throughout history, brilliant inventions, ambitious DIY experiments, and massive industrial projects have helped shape our world. But every breakthrough also carried the potential for catastrophic mistakes. In this compilation, you'll discover true stories of inventors caught by their own creations, backyard engineering projects that spiraled out of control, and industrial accidents that forever changed the way we think about safety. Each story has been recreated in a stylized, steampunk-inspired animated documentary, combining history, engineering, and science to explore not just what happened, but why it happened and what we can learn from it. So grab a seat, and let's dive into some of the most fascinating engineering failures ever recorded.
Number 1, the man eaten by the news. The year is 1867. Philadelphia, and William Bullock is about to become the only newspaperman in history to be literally chewed up by the press. Here's the setup. Bullock is a self-taught mechanic, the kind of guy who looks at a machine and instantly sees 10 ways to make it faster. So he builds one, the Webb rotary printing press, a steel monster that swallows giant rolls of paper and spits out 12,000 printed sheets an hour. Later models hit 30,000. Before Bullock, printing was slow, hand-fed, human-paced. After Bullock, the news moved like a runaway freight train. He basically invented the modern media fire hose. Congratulations, William. You just gave humanity the power to be wrong at industrial scale. But this is where the investigation gets juicy. April 3rd, one of his beautiful machines is being installed for the Philadelphia Public Ledger. Something's off. A driving belt won't sit right on its pulley. Now, a reasonable man shuts the machine down. Bullock is not feeling reasonable today. Bullock decides to fix it the manly way. He kicks the belt back onto the spinning pulley with his foot. Sit with that for a second. He tries to roundhouse kick a live industrial machine, and the machine, being made of steel and having exactly zero sense of humor, grabs his leg and reels him in like a spaghetti noodle. The leg is crushed to pulp. Now the slow part begins. This is not a clean cinematic death. Over the next few days, the leg turns bad. Gangrene sets in. That special rotting from the inside situation that tells everybody in the room how the story ends. April 12th. The doctors do the only thing left on the menu. They try to saw the leg off. Bullock dies right there on the operating table, killed in slow motion by the exact machine that made him a legend. The verdict? The man built the fastest way on earth to spread a story, and the single biggest story his press ever printed was his own obituary. Number 2, first class to the afterlife. January 13th, 1882. A freezing night in the Bronx on a sliver of track hugging Spuyten Duyvil Creek. And State Senator Webster Wagner is riding in the most comfortable train car money can buy. A car he invented, which is about to fold up around him like a cheap accordion. Background check. Wagner is the guy who looked at 1800s train travel, wooden benches, upright misery, the dignity of a livestock crate, and said, "What if you could sleep?" So he builds the sleeping car. Then the plush parlor car. He starts the Wagner Palace Car Company and gets rich turning trains into rolling hotels. If you traveled overnight in America and woke up not hating your life, thank Webster. Now, the investigation and a little physics, because physics is the real killer here. His train stops on the tracks. A second train comes barreling in behind it and doesn't stop. Here's the thing nobody in 1882 designed for. Momentum. A train is thousands of tons moving at speed, and all that energy has to go somewhere. Modern cars have crumple zones, parts built to fold and absorb the hit, so you don't. An 1882 wooden rail car has the exact opposite. Rigid ends, strong frame, and couplers that don't let go. So when the rear train slams in, the cars don't crumple outward. They telescope. That's the technical term, and it's as gruesome as it sounds. One car rides up and drives straight through the inside of the next one like a sword going into a sheath. Everything inside the sheath, seats, luggage, senators, is in the way. Wagner is crushed between two of his own beautiful cars. And then it gets worse, because those luxury cars were lit by oil lamps and warmed by coal stoves. Translation: Every cozy little cabin was a tiny fireplace on wheels. The wreck goes up in flames. Locals literally rolled giant snowballs into the fire to fight it, because that's all they've got. By the time it's over, Wagner's body is burned beyond recognition. The only way they identify the man is a gold watch, engraved with his initials, WW. The verdict? He spent his life making sure people could lie down in comfort on a train. And, in the end, his own masterpiece laid him down for good. Number 3. The man who fed himself to a mosquito Cuba, 1900. Yellow fever is mowing down soldiers and locals by the thousands, and nobody knows how it spreads. Bad air? Dirty laundry? Ghosts? Enter Dr. Jesse Lazare, a young American doctor on Walter Reed's investigation team, hunting a killer he can't even see. The suspect. A theory that everyone in polite medicine thinks is ridiculous. That yellow fever isn't caught from filth. It's injected into you by mosquitoes. Specifically, one dainty little insect we now call Aedes aegypti. Here's the biology, minus the boredom. The mosquito isn't the killer. It's the getaway driver. When a female mosquito bites an infected person, she sucks up the virus with the blood. The virus then quietly breeds inside her guts for about 2 weeks, a mandatory incubation vacation, and only then can she pass it on with her next bite. So timing is everything. Bite too early after feeding, nothing happens. Wait the right number of days, and that same bite is a loaded syringe. This is exactly the detail nobody had pinned down. So how does a proper scientist test it in 1900? He rolls up his own sleeve. The investigation gets personal. Lazare lets infected mosquitoes bite volunteers, and by most accounts feeds himself to one too. Officially, he claimed a wild stray mosquito got him at a hospital. Historians strongly suspect our boy knew exactly what he was doing and just didn't want to spook his bosses. Days later, the fever comes for him. And yellow fever is not a gentle way out. Your liver quits, which turns your skin the sickly yellow that gives the disease its name. Then comes the party trick nobody wants. Internal bleeding, so the victim vomits up black, half-digested blood. The Spanish called it vomito negro, black vomit. Charming. Jesse Lazare dies on September 25th, 1900, age 34. A wife and 2 kids at home, one he never met. The verdict? He was right. Dead right. His self-experiment proved the mosquito was the culprit, and that one proof led to mosquito control that has since saved literally millions of lives. He solved the murder by volunteering to be the next victim. Case closed. In his own blood. Number 4. Los Alamos, New Mexico, August 21st, 1945. The war is basically over, but in a quiet lab, a physicist named Harry Daghlian is about to lose a fistfight with the most fundamental force in the universe. On the table, a 6.2 kilogram sphere of plutonium, warm to the touch, softball-sized and so casually lethal that the scientists nicknamed it the Demon Core. This thing was built to be the heart of a 3rd atomic bomb. Instead, it's about to freelance. Time for the physics, and I promise to make it painless, unlike what happened to Harry. Plutonium is radioactive. It constantly spits out neutrons. Normally, those neutrons just fly off into the room, no big deal. But if you surround the core with the right material, those escaping neutrons get bounced right back in. Like putting mirrors around a sparkler. Bounce enough neutrons back, and each one triggers more atoms to split, which fire off more neutrons, which trigger more splits. That runaway snowball is called going critical. In a bomb, that's the whole point. On a lab bench, it's a death sentence. Harry is working late, alone. Rule number 1, he's already broken. Stacking bricks of tungsten carbide around the core to see how close he can get to critical. It's basically Jenga, except the tower is made of invisible death. He's lowering one last brick into place when it slips out of his fingers and drops straight onto the core. Instant. The core goes critical. A blue flash lights up the room. That's the air itself getting ionized, glowing like a ghost. Harry feels a wave of heat and a tingling in his hand. He doesn't run. He reaches in with his bare hand and knocks the brick off to shut it down. Which is brave, and also completely too late. That single half second bathed him in a dose of radiation that shredded his cells from the inside. Radiation sickness is a slow, ugly unraveling. First nausea, then his hand blisters and dies. Then his whole body follows as the damaged cells fail to replace themselves. Harry Daghlian dies. 25 days later, he is 24 years old. He got to touch the raw power that ended a world war. 9 months later, the very same core would kill a second scientist. That's why they finally, permanently called it the Demon. Number 5, the man struck by a ball of lightning. St. Petersburg, Russia. August 1753. Science is having its electricity phase. Everyone's obsessed with this mysterious invisible fluid. And Professor Georg Wilhelm Richmann is about to become the field's first martyr, killed by a phenomenon so rare that people still argue about whether it's real. Set up. Ben Franklin has recently done his famous kite in a thunderstorm stunt and survived the lucky devil. Scientists all over Europe are copying him, running metal rods up to the sky to catch lightning and study it. Richmann builds his own version, a rod on the roof, wired down into his lab to a measuring gadget, so he can read how much electric charge a storm is throwing around. Reasonable, careful, very scientific. Normal lightning is a straight, brutal bolt, millions of volts taking the fastest path to the ground. What allegedly got Richmann is the weird cousin, ball lightning. It's a glowing, floating sphere of energy that drifts around for a few seconds and sometimes explodes. To this day, nobody fully agrees on what it is or how it forms. Plasma, burning silicon vapor, some electromagnetic hiccup. It's the cryptid of physics. And in 1753, one showed up in a professor's lab like an uninvited guest. A thunderstorm rolls in. Richmann, thrilled, rushes home with his engraver to record the readings for posterity. Because if you're going to make history, you want an illustrator present. He leans in toward the apparatus to take a measurement. A pale blue ball of light detaches from the rod, floats across the gap, and connects with his forehead. Bang! A sound like a cannon. Richmann drops dead on the spot. His shoes are blown open, his colleague is knocked flat and knocked out, and the doorframe is split. The man is killed instantly by a glowing orb hitting him right between the eyes, which is frankly the most metal way a scientist has ever died. Richmann went looking for the secrets of electricity, notebook in hand, and electricity answered by punching him in the face with a fireball. He earned a grim honor, the first person in recorded history to die doing electrical research. Franklin got a national holiday. Richmann got a crater in his forehead. Timing is everything. Number 6, the pilot who accidentally invented the jet age. Paris, December 16th, 1910. A young Romanian engineer named Henri Coanda wheels out a machine so far ahead of its time that half of history refuses to believe it flew at all. This is the one survivor in our case files. But only just. It's the era of wood, canvas, and propellers. Everyone's building airplanes that flap along on spinning wooden sticks. Coanda looks at all that and decides propellers are for peasants. He bolts a different beast onto his aircraft. Instead of a propeller, he uses a spinning compressor to ram air into a chamber, mixes in fuel, and burns it to shove the plane forward. Congratulations! That is, roughly, the ancestor of the jet engine, decades before jets were supposed to exist. Here's the physics he was surfing on. Thrust is just Newton's third law with attitude. Throw mass backward fast, and it shoves you forward. A propeller does it gently, grabbing air like a hand fan. Coanda's contraption did it violently, by setting fuel on fire and blasting the exhaust out the back. More thrust, more speed, and, as a bonus feature nobody asked for, actual flames. Coanda settles in for what's meant to be a ground test. A little taxi run, nothing dramatic. He fires up the engine. Two things happen at once. One, long tongues of fire start shooting out of the exhaust ports on both sides of him. Two, the machine, with more thrust than he bargained for, stops taxiing and starts flying. which sounds great, except our man is a mechanical engineer, not a pilot, and he has approximately zero plan for the "and now it's airborne" scenario. Distracted by the fact that he is a passenger in a flying campfire, Cohen loses control, the aircraft noses over, slams down, and the whole thing goes up in flames. And here's the twist that keeps him out of the graveyard. The crash throws him clear before the fire can finish the job. He walks away with scorched hands, a singed face, and, in his own words, a good scare. He built a machine so advanced it literally spat fire, nearly cremated himself on the maiden run, and survived to become a legend. Fun footnote: while getting flame grilled, he noticed the fire clinging to the fuselage instead of blowing straight back, a quirk of how fast air hugs a surface. That quirk is now called the Coanda effect, and it helps keep modern aircraft in the sky. The man almost died and came back with homework. Number 7. The artist who forgot to weigh his parachute. London, July 24th, 1837. Vauxhall Gardens, a giant balloon, a cheering crowd, and a 61-year-old watercolor painter named Robert Cocking, who is about to conduct the world's first fatal skydive using a design that fails one very basic test: arithmetic. Decades earlier, Cocking saw an early parachute jump and became convinced the standard round canopy design was rubbish. It swung like a pendulum and made people sick. He was sort of right, so he spends years perfecting his better idea: an upside-down parachute. Instead of a dome that opens upward like a mushroom, his is a giant inverted cone, wide end down, 107 feet around, built of Irish linen and metal hoops. On paper, pretty. In physics, a coffin. Let's talk about the physics he skipped, because he sure did. A parachute works by air resistance. The fabric shoves against the air, and that push slows your fall. The bigger and lighter the setup relative to your weight, the gentler you drift down. The killer variable is the total weight the canopy has to carry. Cocking designed his cone to lower a certain load safely, but when he did the math, he only counted himself. He forgot to include the weight of the parachute itself. All that metal and linen, hundreds of pounds of it, so the real load was way heavier than his cone could ever hold up against the air. The design was doomed before he left the ground. It just didn't know it yet. And neither did he. He's slung underneath the great Nassau balloon and hauled up to 5,000 feet. Cheerful to the end, he calls out to the balloonists above, "Good night, Spencer. Good night, Green." Genuinely his last words. And pulls the release. For a moment, it works. Then the air load he never calculated crushes the flimsy cone. The whole apparatus folds in on itself and drops like a bag of scrap metal. Cocking rides his invention straight down and hits a field near Lee. He dies within minutes. A talented artist spent years engineering a parachute to be safer and smoother, and got killed by a number he left off the page. He wanted to prove the experts wrong about air resistance. Air resistance filed a very firm rebuttal. Number 8. Full steam ahead into the afterlife. Cambridge, Massachusetts, June 1st, 1896. A racetrack packed with bicyclists and spectators. And a 72-year-old inventor named Sylvester Roper is about to prove his machine is fast, possibly by dying on it, in front of everyone. Roper is a genuine old-school tinkerer, the kind who was building steam-powered gadgets before most people trusted indoor plumbing. His masterpiece is the steam velocipede, basically a bicycle with a coal-fired steam boiler bolted underneath the seat. Think about riding a bike with a small furnace between your legs. That's the motorcycle, decades before the word was cool. Some historians literally credit this thing as one of the first motorcycles on Earth. A steam engine is controlled fury. You burn fuel to boil water, the water flashes into steam, and steam takes up way more space than water. So it fights to expand, and you aim that push at a piston to spin the wheel. More fire, more pressure, more speed. It's elegant. It's also a boiler strapped to a bike frame, and boilers do not love being ignored. Roper brings his machine to the track to pace the bicycle racers, to show that his steam bike can outrun a fit young man on pedals. And it can. Witnesses clock him flying around the track at a genuinely alarming speed for 1896. Wheels a blur. Then, on one lap, the bike starts to wobble. It weaves, drifts offline, and goes down, Roper with it. And here's the twist the coroner delivered. When they examine him, the crash injuries aren't what killed him. His heart had given out. The mystery, the one nobody can solve to this day, is the order of events. Did the 72-year-old's heart stop first, causing him to lose control and crash? Or did the sheer white-knuckle speed of his own invention spike his heart into failure right there in the saddle? Machine first or heart first? We genuinely don't know. Either the speed killed the man, or the man died and then the speed took the body for one last ride. Whichever way you slice it, Sylvester Roper died going full throttle on a machine he built with his own hands, having just proved it was faster than everybody else. Not a bad exit, honestly. Loud, fast, and undefeated. Number 9. The carpenter who bet his life on a wooden box. Plymouth, England, June 22nd, 1774. A carpenter named John Day climbs into a homemade wooden chamber, seals himself inside, and sinks into the sea on purpose to win a bet. Spoiler, he does not collect. Day is a wheelwright and carpenter with one big dangerous idea. He thinks he can build a chamber that lets a man sit comfortably underwater for hours. To fund the dream, he teams up with a professional gambler named Christopher Blake, and they turn science into a wager, the bet. Day and his craft will drop to 130 feet deep, sit there for 12 hours, and come back up. Blake bankrolls it and bets on it. What could go wrong? Everything. Everything could go wrong. Now the physics, which Day treated as a minor suggestion. Water is heavy, and the deeper you go, the more of it is stacked on top of you, pressing in from every direction. At 130 feet, the pressure is roughly 5 times what you feel at the surface. Several tons of squeeze on every square foot of your wooden box. Day's chamber was basically a sealed barrel with a hammock, a candle, some biscuits, and water. Wood versus the crushing weight of the deep ocean is not a fair fight. Wood loses. Also, he had the buoyancy math wrong. How much weight makes the box sink versus float back up? Get that wrong, and down becomes a one-way trip. The chamber is bolted to a 50-ton sloop, towed out into Plymouth Sound and loaded with heavy weights to make it sink. Day climbs in with his candle and snacks. They lock him inside, and down he goes. He never comes back up. The weights he trusted to be dropped for the return trip didn't do their job, where the pressure simply flattened the box first. Take your pick of nightmares. Crushed by pressure, frozen, or slowly suffocated in the dark. A month later, a hopeful doctor even mounts a rescue, convinced Day might be in some magical suspended animation down there. He wasn't. He was just gone. John Day earns a grim first place, the first human ever recorded to die in a submarine accident, before the word submarine even existed. He gambled his life against the physics of deep water, using a box a carpenter would build. The house always wins. The house, in this case, was the Atlantic. Number 10. The man who painted the night sky and glowed to death. New Jersey, 1920s. Dr. Sabin von Soshaki invented something genuinely magical, paint that glows in the dark all on its own, and then watched it kill his workers, kill his reputation, and finally, poetically, kill him. Von Soshaki is a physician and inventor who cooks up a luminous paint called Undark. Mix a pinch of radium into zinc sulfide, and the stuff glows a soft, eerie green. No batteries, no sunlight needed. Forever. It's a miracle product. Suddenly, you can read your watch in the dark, aim a gauge in a trench at night, find the light switch at 3 a.m. He starts the U.S. Radium Corporation, and business booms. Here's the physics of the magic. And the horror. Radium is radioactive, which means its atoms are unstable and constantly firing off tiny high-speed particles as they break down. Those particles smack into the zinc sulfide and make it light up. Pretty. The problem is those exact same particles don't care whether they're hitting paint or a human being. Inside a body, They act like microscopic shotgun pellets, ripping through cells and scrambling the DNA that tells cells how to behave. Do that long enough, and you get anemia, rotting bone, and cancer. The glow and the killing are the same process. You cannot have one without the other. His factory workers, the radium girls, hand paint tiny watch numbers, and to make a fine point, they lick their brushes. Lick, dip, paint. Lick, dip, paint. Swallowing radium all day. Soon their jaws are literally crumbling in a horror doctor's dubbed radium jaw. When they sue, guess who helps prove that radium is the culprit? Von Sachaki himself, using instruments to show their bodies are glowing with contamination. But the twist is already inside him. Years of handling the stuff barehanded, he'd even lost a fingertip to it. Soaked his own body in radiation. In 1928, he dies of aplastic anemia. His bone marrow, cooked by his own invention, simply stops making blood. The exact same death as the girls in his factory. And he gave the world a light that never needed the sun. And it turned out to be a light that quietly ate everyone who touched it, inventor included. Reportedly, when they tested his bones, they were more radioactive than his workers. The man didn't just make the glowing paint. In the end, he was it. We start in Beijing, where a wealthy doctor named Jiang Biqing looked at his penthouse on top of a 26-story apartment block and thought, nice. But you know what's missing? A mountain. Not a painting of a mountain, not a bonsai garden, with fake rocks, real trees, real grass, and a villa hidden inside it. And for 6 years, he hauled rubble, boulders, and construction crews up to the roof while the neighbors below developed a nervous twitch. Over 800 square meters of landscape, assembled one elevator ride at a time like the world's slowest, heaviest heist. Zhang wasn't some random dreamer, by the way. He was a professor of traditional Chinese medicine, owner of a national chain of acupuncture clinics, and a former government advisor. A man whose entire career was built on the phrase, do no harm, spent 6 years doing structural harm to a residential high-rise. The neighbors complained about cracked walls, leaking ceilings, and the gentle sound of construction machinery at breakfast. Some of them simply moved out, which, when your upstairs neighbor is building an alpine landscape above your bedroom, is a completely rational housing decision. The best part? Everybody could see it. This wasn't a secret basement. It was a 2-story rock formation on a rooftop in the middle of Beijing, visible from every window in the district. And probably from orbit. It still took officials years to ask the obvious question. Excuse me, sir, is that a mountain? And do you have a permit for it? He did not. In 2013, the city gave him 15 days to tear it all down, or they would do it for him. The mountain came down the way it went up, one embarrassing rock at a time. Somewhere in Beijing, there is a doctor who, for one brief moment, owned his own private Alps. Nature heals, they say. Buildings, unfortunately, don't. Now to Arkhangelsk, in the Russian north, where businessman Nikolai Sutyagin started building a family home in 1992. A modest 2-story house. Then he looked at it and felt something was off. The roof, he decided, looked wrong. So he added a floor. Still wrong. Another floor. And another. 15 years later, the house was 13 stories tall, 44 meters high. The tallest wooden building on the planet, assembled without a single blueprint, permit, or moment of self-doubt. His neighbors lived in normal houses. He lived in a decision that never stopped being made. Picture a skyscraper built by a man playing Jenga in reverse, with the confidence of someone who owns a sawmill and the paperwork of someone who owns nothing. Locals called it the skyscraper. Firefighters called it a nightmare with stairs. It creaked in the wind like a pirate ship, and every winter it soaked up rain and snow because the outside was never actually finished. Sutyagin himself explained that he just kept going to see how far he could go. Buddy, that is not architecture. That is a dare with a mortgage. Construction paused when Sutyagin went to prison for racketeering. Because of course he did. And the tower spent 4 years quietly rotting, waiting for its creator like a loyal, structurally unsound dog. In 2008, the courts finally looked up way up, and declared the whole thing a fire hazard, which is a bit like declaring the ocean a drowning hazard. The order came down, and then so did the house, pulled apart floor by floor until only a small two-story building remained, which, funny enough, is exactly what he had planned to build in the first place. 15 years, 13 floors, a world record, and a prison sentence, all to end up back at the sketch on page 1. In the Chinese city of Nanning, one man solved a problem nobody in history has ever had. He owned 2 apartments in 2 different high-rise towers facing each other, 20-something floors above the street. Most people would call that 2 apartments. He called it one apartment with an annoying gap in the middle. So he built a bridge, a private steel metal-clad corridor, welded between 2 residential towers hanging in the sky above pedestrians who had no idea what was rattling over their morning walk. His commute between apartments dropped to about 10 seconds, which is fantastic, right up until you remember what those 10 seconds were suspended by. Let's be clear about the engineering here. Real sky bridges are designed by teams of structural engineers, wind tunnel tested, stress calculated, and approved by roughly 40 departments. This one was designed by a guy who wanted to carry his tea from one living room to the other living room without using an elevator. The support structure was a space frame of steel trusses that looked like scaffolding that had given up on its dreams. Earthquake rating, hope. Wind rating, prayer. Permit status, what permit? And the punchline, the bridge wasn't even for the building's residents. It was his alone. A single private skywalk, like a billionaire's penthouse amenity, except instead of a billionaire, it was one stubborn homeowner, and instead of engineering, it was pure vibes. The neighbors below got to live with the knowledge that somewhere above their heads, a homemade steel tube was hanging on by welds of unknown quality, waiting for the first serious storm to test the warranty. Because nothing says I trust my own handiwork like walking through the sky inside it, and nothing says I don't understand physics quite as loudly either. To England, Herefordshire, where farmer John Price looked at the River Lug, a legally protected river home to otters, kingfishers, and salmon, and saw a problem. The river, in his professional opinion, was too rivery. So he did what any reasonable man would do. He brought in an 18-ton bulldozer and gave 1.5 kilometers of protected riverbank the same treatment a lawnmower gives a daisy. This wasn't a weekend of enthusiasm either. The works went on across 2 years, which is plenty of time for the thought, should I check if this is legal? To knock and be ignored. He ripped out the trees. He stripped the vegetation. He dredged the riverbed and reshaped the banks until a living river looked like a drainage ditch on a construction site. His explanation, flood prevention. He was protecting the village, you see. One small detail. When the environmental agencies checked, his work provided 0 flood protection. Not a little. 0. He had bulldozed an entire river ecosystem into a canal for nothing. Experts called it the worst river destruction they had ever seen and said recovery would take decades. The otters were not available for comment. They were busy being homeless. Then the bill came due. 10 months behind bars and 600,000 pounds in costs. 600 grand. For that money, you could build an actual flood defense designed by actual engineers with permits and a ribbon-cutting ceremony. And here's the cherry on top. After serving his time, Price told reporters he had no regrets. None. 0 regrets. Matching, coincidentally, the exact amount of flood protection he built. A man went to prison for beating up a river and walked out feeling like the victim. Somewhere on the lug, a kingfisher is still looking for its tree. It's been rough for everyone. Now, a tragedy disguised as a comedy. From Jilin province in northern China, the village of Jianlin sat cut off by the Tower River, and the nearest bridge was 70 kilometers away. 70. That's not a detour. That's a road trip with snacks. So a local farmer, Huang Dai, did something truly outrageous. He solved it. He welded 13 metal boats together into a floating pontoon bridge, and suddenly the village had a river crossing that didn't require half a tank of fuel and a full day of your life. 13 boats, 1 welder, 0 committees. Take notes, infrastructure departments of the world. Actually, no, don't. You'll arrest him. Spoiler, for years the bridge just worked. Cars crossed, farmers crossed. Life got 70 kilometers shorter. Huang reportedly charged a small fee to keep the thing maintained, because floating steel doesn't weld itself back together. And this is where our hero made his fatal mistake. Not in the welding was fine, but in forgetting the first law of infrastructure. You can't just build useful things. There are procedures. There are forms. There is a correct official way to not have a bridge for decades. And he disrespected it. The authorities eventually arrived, took one look at the most useful structure in the county, and ordered it dismantled. Then they went after the man who built it. Huang was accused of illegally profiting from his bridge and got 2 years. The villagers went back to the 70-kilometer drive, presumably passing a government office where a proper bridge has been under review since forever. So remember the lesson. Cut corners on safety and you might lose your house. Build something that actually works without permission and they'll take your bridge and your freedom. Bureaucracy needs its paperwork, like a vampire needs blood. And it always collects. Over to Michigan, where a homeowner in Salem Township faced humanity's oldest enemy, weeds under the deck. Now, he didn't want to use pesticides. Too invasive, too chemical, not natural enough. Respect. So he chose the organic, eco-friendly alternative. A propane torch. Yes. To avoid harming the environment, he decided to introduce fire, a substance famous for its gentle, controlled behavior, to the dry vegetation directly underneath his wooden deck, attached to his vinyl-sided house. Because when you think gentle alternative to chemicals, you naturally think of the thing fire departments have entire buildings dedicated to fighting. He torched the weeds. Then, and this is the part that separates amateurs from legends, he looked away. He thought the fire was out. He walked around to the front of the house, probably feeling great about his chemical-free lifestyle. When he came back, the backyard had developed opinions. The flames had spread from the weeds to a nearby bush, from the bush to the vinyl siding, and from the siding into the house itself, moving faster than his insurance agent's blood pressure was about to. The call came in at about 2:40 in the afternoon. Brush on fire near a house. By the end of the day, more than a dozen fire agencies from multiple counties were fighting it. And the home was a total loss. Everything gone. The family made it out safe. Thank goodness. The only casualties were the building and one man's faith in natural gardening. And the weeds? Oh, the weeds are absolutely definitely dead. Mission accomplished, technically. He wanted a yard without chemicals and ended up with a lot without a house. So next time, folks, just pull the weeds by hand. Your knees will complain, but your kitchen will continue to exist. And the dandelions will come back anyway. They always come back. They're the real winners of this story. In Texas, a woman watched her neighbors build an above-ground pool with the exact feeling you get watching a toddler carry a full aquarium. This ends wet. The pool was technically compliant with the neighborhood rules, so she said nothing. She just watched the wobbly walls go up next door and quietly noted that tens of thousands of liters of water would soon be sitting uphill from her living room, held back by optimism and a weekend YouTube tutorial. She had a bad feeling from day one. Narrator's note: in these stories, the neighbor with the bad feeling is never, ever wrong. Here's what people forget. An above-ground pool holds serious weight. A decent-sized one is around 50 tons of water. That's a herd of elephants standing in your yard, held in place by thin metal panels and competence. Professional installers level the ground, compact the base, and check the structure. Weekend warriors eyeball it. And water is patient. Water waits. Water finds the weak point with the dedication of a divorce lawyer going through receipts. Not long after the pool was finished, it let go. The wall collapsed, and the entire contents took the shortest route downhill, straight through the neighbor's home. Her living room became, in her own words, a mess of mud, water, and broken flooring. an indoor water feature nobody ordered. Then came the second flood. Insurance calls, endless calls, claims, and paperwork for damage caused by somebody else's weekend project. Eventually, her insurance covered it. And the pool building neighbors? Once they learned they wouldn't have to pay, they simply moved on with their lives. No apology, not even a casserole. So if your neighbor starts building a pool with a confident face and no laser level, move your couch upstairs, and the TV, and yourself. This next one, I'll tell you straight, it's dark even for this channel, because the price wasn't a house. It was 2 lives. In Hopkins, Minnesota, someone replaced a water heater. A normal weekend job, the kind of thing millions of people do. Except a water heater that runs on natural gas is not a piece of furniture. It's an appliance connected to a pipe full of invisible explosive fuel, and it comes with exactly one sacred rule. The gas line goes back on. Sealed, checked, tested. Not probably fine. Not we'll see. Tested. The investigation later found that the gas line to the heater was never properly reattached after the recent installation. That's it. That's the whole story. No storm, no freak accident, no act of God. Just a connection that wasn't secured after a do-it-yourself job. Gas is sneaky. It doesn't announce itself with sirens. It fills a basement quietly, molecule by molecule, and waits for the smallest spark. A pilot light, a light switch, static from a sweater. When it found one, the house didn't catch fire. It simply ceased to exist. The explosion leveled the building, and the 2 people inside never had a chance. Here's what makes this one hurt. A professional gas hookup costs less than a nice dinner out. A leak test is soapy water in a spray bottle. You spray the joint and watch for bubbles. 30 seconds of checking versus a crater where a home used to be. I make jokes about mountains on rooftops and men who fight rivers. But this is the quiet lesson hiding under all of them. Some mistakes charge interest you cannot pay. If your project involves gas, hire the boring licensed guy with the clipboard and the beeping detector. Boring guys are boring precisely because nothing ever explodes around them. That's the whole service. That's what you're paying for. Time for some aviation. In the hills of Muizi, in western Uganda, an inventor named Joseph Nakaheza looked at the sky and decided it was accepting applications. He built himself a helicopter. Not bought, built. From scratch, from whatever parts a rural district could provide. Powered by determination and a deep personal disagreement with the science of aerodynamics. No wind tunnel, no test bench, no flight manual, just a man, some metal, and a dream with a rotor bolted on top of it. And here's the twist. It flew, sort of. On test day, his homemade chopper actually left the ground and climbed to about 16 feet. 16 feet. That's higher than your roof. For one glorious moment, Joseph Nakaheza was a pilot, an aircraft manufacturer, and the most interesting man in the district. All at once. The problem with 16 feet, though, is that it's the worst possible altitude. High enough to hurt you, low enough that you have zero time to figure anything out. And at exactly that height, the machine reminded him that building a helicopter and flying a helicopter are 2 completely different university degrees, and he had enrolled in neither. He lost control, and the aircraft came down the way homemade aircrafts do. Suddenly, and with immediate feedback, Nkaheza was pulled from the wreck and taken to a clinic, banged up but alive, which honestly puts him in the top percentile of people who build their own helicopters. Look it up. The history of DIY helicopters reads like a cemetery guest book. The rotor forgives nothing. So credit where it's due. The man built a machine that flew, crashed it, and lived to sketch version 2. That's not a fail. That's a miracle with bruises. Still, Joseph, if you're watching, have you considered drones? They crash, so you don't have to. Back to England for the greatest game of hide and seek in real estate history. Farmer Robert Fiddler of Surrey wanted to build a house. Planning permission said no. So Robert consulted the rulebook and found what he believed was a cheat code. If a building stands for 4 years without anyone objecting, it can become legal. One small problem. Someone has to not notice an entire house for 4 years. His solution? Build the house inside a haystack. Not near a haystack. Not behind a haystack. Inside one. This is the kind of plan a cartoon villain rejects for being too silly. I am not simplifying. The man built a full mock Tudor castle. Turrets, ramparts, the works. And surrounded the entire thing with a giant wall of straw bales covered in tarpaulin. From the outside, farm stuff, nothing to see here. Inside, a castle where his family secretly lived for 4 years like the world's most committed escape room team. The kids grew up in a hidden fortress. Guests presumably got directions like, turn left at the hay, knock twice. Then, convinced he had run out the legal clock, Fiedler triumphantly pulled away the bales. Ta-da! The council did not applaud. Their position was elegantly simple. The 4-year timer doesn't count if you've hidden the building. The same way a bank robbery doesn't become legal once you've successfully hidden the money. The courts agreed. The appeal courts agreed. 10 years of legal warfare later, with a suspended prison sentence hanging over his head, Robert Fiedler was forced to demolish his own castle with his own hands, which is almost Shakespearean. A man builds his dream in secret, unveils it in triumph, and then personally takes it apart brick by brick. The straw, ironically, turned out to be the most stable part of the entire plan. London now, and the legend of the mole man of Hackney. William Little inherited a 20-room house on Mortimer Road, and somewhere in the 1960s, he had a thought that would consume the next 40 years of his life. What if, down, armed with a shovel and infinite free time, he began to dig and dig. No plan, no destination, no exit strategy. The man tunneled the way other people watch television every day for decades. Not a wine cellar, not a hobby room. A network of tunnels reaching 8 meters deep and spreading 20 meters in every direction. Under his garden, under the pavement, under the neighbor's peace of mind. When journalists finally asked the obvious question, why? Little delivered one of the great quotes of our time. I'm a man who enjoys digging. That's it. That's the entire planning application. 4 decades of tunneling summarized like a hobby line on a dating profile. Meanwhile, above ground, reality was filing complaints. The electricity kept cutting out. The water supply did whatever it wanted. And eventually, the street itself gave up. A sinkhole opened in the road outside his house, offering pedestrians a free preview of his life's work. The house above, meanwhile, sagged like a cake, with the middle eaten out, held together mostly by habit. The council evicted him and sent in engineers who pumped 2,000 tons of aerated concrete into the tunnels at a cost of nearly 300,000 pounds. Then they put him up in a hotel for 3 years, another 45 grand of public money, and finally, in a move of genuine institutional wisdom, rehoused him in a top-floor flat, as far above the ground as physically possible, where the only thing he could dig was the sofa. Rest in peace, mole man. You dug for 40 years, and the city had to fill your legacy with concrete just to make it stop. January 2015, Toronto. A conservation officer walking through the woods near York University finds a hole. Inside the hole, a tunnel. 10 meters long, taller than a grown man, professionally reinforced with lumber, lit with moisture-resistant bulbs, powered by a generator, drained by a sump pump, with a pulley system for hauling out dirt. Oh, and it happens to sit near a venue for the upcoming Pan Am Games. You can hear the national security alarms from here. A mystery hole, professional-grade equipment, and a major international event around the corner. Every action movie starts exactly like this. The police went full spy thriller. Was it terrorism? Smuggling? For weeks, investigators studied the mystery tunnel while the media speculated like it was a season finale. The only clues: careful engineering, serious dedication, and a rosary with a remembrance poppy nailed to the wall. Which, let's be honest, made the whole thing sound even more cinematic. The story went national. Experts weighed in. Canada collectively held its breath. Then a tip came in, and the truth was revealed. 2 young guys had dug it by hand, as a man cave. That's it. A 20-something construction worker named Elton McDonald and his buddy wanted a quiet place to hang out. So instead of renting one like a coward, they excavated a private bunker with better drainage than most Toronto basements. No charges were filed. Digging a really, really nice hole is not technically a crime. The police closed the file, the city filled the tunnel, and somewhere a national security analyst had to type the words "man cave" into an official report. Honestly, respect. Some men buy a shed. Some men become a federal investigation. In a city where nobody can afford a one-bedroom, these two dug their own real estate. And it was load-bearing. Down to Brazil, the state of Pará, where a man built his own airplane powered by a car engine. Let that combination settle in for a moment. An engine designed for traffic jams and school runs, bolted to a homemade airframe and asked to keep a human being above the trees. The aircraft was registered as experimental, which is aviation speak for good luck. And the builder pilot described his machine in his own words as very safe. Aviation history teaches us exactly one thing about that phrase. It is always spoken shortly before it gets tested. Nobody in the history of flight has ever said very safe and then had an uneventful year. And tested it was. On a fine morning near Benavides, the plane went down and crash-landed on a farm. Specifically, a property belonging to a concrete company, because the universe insists on symbolism. The pilot remarkably survived to explain himself. And oh, what an explanation it was. The crash, he said, was not the fault of the design, or the car engine, or the general concept of homemade aviation. No, no, no. He hit a vulture. A vulture took down the aircraft. The bird, tragically, could not offer its version of events. Now, to be fair, bird strikes are absolutely real. They've taken down actual commercial jets with actual engineering budgets. But there is something deeply poetic about a homemade plane with a car engine being defeated by a bird whose entire brand is circling things that are about to die. That's not an accident. That's a review. Air Force investigators came out to examine the wreckage, as they do. Whatever their report concluded, the lesson stands: when your aircraft's engine was designed for a sedan, every takeoff is a negotiation, and nature holds veto power. Very safe, remember? The vulture respectfully disagreed. Now the heaviest chapter from Cairo, a city where DIY construction isn't a hobby, it's an epidemic with a body count. Real estate in Egypt's capital is brutal, so for decades, building owners have played a deadly game. Take an existing apartment block and just add floors. No engineers, no permits, no calculations. Just bricks, concrete, and greed, stacked on top of foundations that were never asked for their opinion. The foundation always answers eventually. It just takes its time. In 2021, a building in Cairo collapsed with at least 25 people inside who never walked out. The investigation found that 4 entire floors had been added illegally. 4. The original structure had been carrying the weight of a second building on its shoulders, silently, for years. Until one day, it simply couldn't. 2 years later, another block came down. 13 lives this time, and the suspected cause was a ground floor resident who had knocked out walls during a renovation. Load-bearing walls, the ones holding up everybody else's homes. He was arrested. The building was already gone, and I want to be precise about where the joke lands here, because it is not on the victims. Families asleep in their own beds, guilty of nothing except living downstairs from somebody else's shortcut. The bitter joke is on the mindset, the landlord who treats a foundation as a suggestion, the renovator who sees a load-bearing wall as wasted floor space. Physics doesn't issue warnings in these cases. It issues consequences all at once, usually at 3 in the morning. Every illegal floor was rent money for one man and a countdown for everyone below him. If you've ever wondered why building codes read like paranoia, this is why. Every boring rule in that book is written in somebody's worst night. And finally, the exception that proves the rule. Arkansas, 2011. The White River is rising. The authorities issue a mandatory evacuation for the county, and everyone sensibly packs up and leaves. Everyone except Russell Petty of Duval's Bluff, who looks at the incoming flood, looks at his house, and makes a decision straight out of the 14th century. We dig a moat. Not sandbags, not a pump. A moat. The man skipped 600 years of flood management science and went straight to castle defense. Petty brought in an excavator and carved a trench around his entire property, piling the dirt into a ring-shaped levee like a man preparing for a siege. Because he was. The river arrived exactly as promised. The neighborhood flooded, homes went under, the region turned into a lake, and in the middle of that lake sat one dry house, surrounded by its own private earthworks, with Russell Petty inside, presumably sharpening a sword. As the water probed his defenses for weak spots, he and his neighbors kept reinforcing the levee with more dirt and sandbags, holding the walls like a medieval garrison. Here's the uncomfortable part. It worked. Out of this entire video, the rooftop mountain, the wooden skyscraper, the hidden castle, the homemade helicopter, the one man who ignored a direct evacuation order and fought a river with a rented digger is the one who won. His castle held. And I cannot stress this enough. Do not learn anything from this. For every Russell Petty, there's a long, quiet list of people who tried to outstubborn nature and lost everything, sometimes including themselves. He didn't win because the plan was good. The plan was insane. The dirt just happened to hold. But credit where credit is due, sometimes the maddest engineer on the street is also the last one standing. And completely dry. Picture the most boring morning of your life. That's how this started. It wasn't a hurricane, it wasn't sabotage. It was a plant startup. The industrial equivalent of turning your car key in the ignition. Something people do thousands of times without thinking. That was the problem. Nobody was thinking. The crew was firing up a unit that boiled gasoline components. To do that, they filled a tall tower with liquid. Simple. There was just one rule. Don't overfill it. And there was one gauge whose entire job in life was to tell them how full it was. That gauge was lying. It showed the tower was comfortably filling up, when in reality, it was drowning. The liquid had shot way past the safe line and kept climbing like a bathtub with the drain taped shut and the faucet stuck on full. Now here's where it gets stupid in that special industrial way. There were alarms. There are always alarms. A high-level alarm went off. Nobody blinked, because at this plant, alarms went off so often they basically become background music, the smoke detector with a dying battery of the refinery world. When everything screams, all the time, nothing screams. So they kept pumping. The tower filled completely. Then the liquid climbed into pipes that were never ever supposed to see liquid. Pressure spiked. A relief valve did exactly what it was designed to do. It dumped the excess, straight up, out of an open-topped vent stack, into the open air, a geyser of flammable hydrocarbon raining down like the world's worst lawn sprinkler. And then the final cosmic level detail. Parked right next to this unit, because why not, were work trailers, full of people, contractors doing paperwork, eating lunch, existing. Somebody's decision to put temporary offices next to a fuel processing tower turned a leak into a body count. The vapor found an ignition source, and the explosion flattened the trailers. 15 dead. Over 180 hurt. The final mistake boiled down to one sentence. They restarted the unit without verifying the actual liquid level. They trusted a screen instead of reality, ignored the alarms because the alarms had cried wolf too many times, and parked human beings next to a bomb. Every single link in that chain was somebody's ordinary Tuesday. Sugar. The villain of this story is sugar. Not gas, not crude oil, not some exotic chemical with 40 syllables. The white stuff you put in your coffee. Here's a fact that sounds fake, but will absolutely ruin your day. Sugar burns. Worse than that, sugar dust explodes. Grind anything fine enough, throw it into the air, and it stops being food and starts being a fuel. Air weapon. Flour does it. Coffee creamer does it. And a sugar refinery makes packages and moves mountains of the stuff every single day, shedding a fine, sweet powder into the air like industrial glitter. At Imperial Sugar, that powder had been settling for years. On beams, on rafters, on top of machinery, on every ledge and surface where nobody looked and nobody cleaned. Layers of it, thick as snow, in places human eyes rarely visited. The building was, functionally, coated on the inside with explosive. All it needed was a spark. One spark, that's the entire recipe. Somewhere in the plant, some piece of overheated equipment or a bit of stray electricity did what sparks do. The dust hanging in the air lit off in a flash. And here's the truly horrifying mechanic that makes dust explosions so deadly. The first small blast is barely the appetizer. Its real job is to shake the building. And when the building shakes, all those years of dust sitting quietly on the beams get thrown into the air at once. And now you've got a second cloud, bigger than the first. And it ignites too. Then a third. A rolling chain of explosions marching through the plant, each one kicking up fuel for the next. 14 people didn't come home. Dozens more were burned, some catastrophically. And the cause? It has the most unglamorous name in disaster history. Housekeeping failure. Not a villain, not a monster, not a freak of nature. Somebody was supposed to clean up, and for years, nobody did. You can explain the entire thing to a stranger in about 20 seconds, and their face will not believe you. Sugar killed 14 people because nobody swept. You already know the name. You've seen the burning rig, the black plume, the ocean on fire. But the movie trailer version misses the actual lesson, which is quieter and much scarier. Nobody did anything crazy. That's the point. There is no single villain here. No one guy pulled a lever labeled "cause massive disaster." Instead, there were about 10 smaller decisions, each one defensible on its own, each one shaving a little margin of safety. Each one made because the rig was behind schedule and running late, costs a fortune per day. Hurry, hurry, hurry. That was the mood. The crew was sealing up a well nearly 3 miles down at the bottom of the Gulf. Before you walk away from a well, you run a pressure test. You're basically asking the Earth, politely, are you going to stay put? They ran the test. The numbers came back weird. Genuinely alarming in hindsight. And instead of treating weird as stop everything, they talked themselves into a story where the numbers were fine. They wanted the good answer, so they found a way to read the bad answer as good. Human beings are extremely gifted at this, and it kills them constantly. Meanwhile, the last line of defense, the blowout preventer, the giant safety valve at the seafloor whose entire purpose is to slam a well shut in an emergency, had issues. A dead battery here, a bent component there. The one thing designed to save everyone if all else failed was itself not fully working. Nobody knew because nobody had verified. So the Earth answered the pressure test its own way. Oil and gas came screaming up the pipe, hit the rig, found a spark, and turned a floating drilling platform into a fireball. Visible for miles, 11 people died. The well then vomited crude into the Gulf for months. The lesson gets carved on the tombstone of the whole industry. No single mistake killed them. It took about 10. Pull any one of those 10 out of the chain, and everybody lives. That's what makes it terrifying. There was no dramatic moment to catch. Just a slow pile of, probably fine. This one is the patron saint of the phrase, "it's just temporary." A chemical plant in England was cooking cyclohexane, a lovely liquid that is essentially gasoline's angrier cousin, kept hot and under pressure. The process ran through a row of 6 big reactors, connected in a line, liquid flowing from one to the next through short sections of pipe. Then one of the reactors cracked, developed a leak. Now, the sensible move is to shut down, fix the reactor, and restart. But shutting down costs money and time, and the plant wanted to keep running. So somebody had a bright idea. Just skip the broken reactor, route the liquid around it. Take reactor 5 out of the lineup and connect reactor 4 straight to reactor 6 with a bypass pipe. Fine in principle, except the 2 reactors weren't lined up neatly, and the pipe that connected them had to be a different, larger diameter with a couple of bends to make the geometry work. A chunky, dog-legged, jury-rigged section of pipe. And here is the sentence that killed 28 people. Nobody did the math. No engineer sat down and calculated whether that improvised pipe could handle the pressure, the temperature, the forces trying to shove it apart. They eyeballed it. They supported it on scaffolding. Literal scaffolding, the stuff you stand on to paint a wall, holding up a pipe full of superheated pressurized fuel. It held for a couple of months. Then the forces won. The jury-rigged pipe tore loose, and 30 to 50 tons of cyclohexane escaped in seconds, flashing into an enormous vapor cloud that drifted across the site and found an ignition source. The explosion was so violent it leveled the plant and damaged buildings for miles around. 28 people died, most of them in the control room. It happened on a weekend, which is the only reason the number wasn't far higher. The whole catastrophe traces back to a temporary fix that skipped the one boring step, the calculation. Because doing it properly would have slowed things down. Temporary solutions have a nasty habit of becoming permanent. Sometimes permanent means forever. Small town in Texas, a fertilizer storage and distribution facility, the kind of unremarkable building you drive past 1,000 times without a second glance. Inside it sat a large quantity of ammonium nitrate, a common farm fertilizer that has one very inconvenient personality trait. Under the right conditions, it doesn't just burn, it detonates. This is the same basic material used in mining explosives and historically in some of the worst bombs ever built. And it was being stored in bulk in a wooden building in the middle of a community. One evening, a fire started at the facility. The exact ignition is its own long story, but the fire itself, at first, was just a fire. The local volunteer firefighters responded like they would to any structure blaze. They rolled up, they aimed their hoses, they did their jobs. What almost none of them fully understood was what that building actually contained and what heat does to a giant pile of ammonium nitrate. They couldn't get the fire under control, and as it burned, it cooked the stockpile. There's a window of time where you're not fighting a fire anymore, you're standing next to a countdown that nobody set, and nobody can see. Then it went off. The blast was so enormous it registered as a small earthquake. It carved a crater into the ground, obliterated the facility, and flattened homes, an apartment complex, a school, and a nursing home nearby. 15 people died, and most of them were first responders, the firefighters who ran toward the danger without knowing they were standing on top of the world's largest sparkler. The mistake underneath it all: storing an enormous amount of a detonating material improperly, with poor separation, in a wooden building close to where people lived and slept. The town had essentially grown up around a bomb, and nobody had drawn a line that said, not here, not this much, not like this. This is the one that plays out like a horror movie where the audience is screaming, "Don't go in there," and everybody goes in there. At a chemical plant in Texas, workers were dealing with methyl mercaptan, a gas so foul-smelling it's the stuff they add to natural gas, so you can smell a leak. But smelling bad is the least of its problems. It's toxic, and critically, it's heavier than air. That single physical fact is the whole tragedy. Heavier than air means it doesn't drift up and away like you'd hope. It sinks. It pools. It fills a room from the floor up like invisible poisonous water. Workers opened up part of the system, and the gas began accumulating in an enclosed space. One worker went down, overcome, collapsed. And here's where human decency becomes a death trap. A co-worker saw them fall and did the most natural, most human thing in the world. Rushed in to help, and went down too. Then another person came to help those two, and went down. And another. This has a clinical name in the safety world because it happens again and again and again. Multiple rescuer fatalities. The gas doesn't announce itself. There's no visible cloud, no wall of flame. The room looks completely normal. It just happens to be full of something that switches your body off. Each person who ran in to save a friend walked into the exact same invisible pool and met the exact same end. because nobody knew, or nobody stopped to check, that the air itself had become the killer. 4 people died, not from an explosion, not from fire, from walking into a room, one at a time, to help the person who'd walked in before them. The instinct that makes us human, you see someone fall, you run to them, is precisely the instinct that gas like this weaponizes. Let's talk about the most innocent killer on this entire list: nitrogen. The gas that makes up most of the air you're breathing right now. 78% of every breath. Completely harmless, non-toxic. Doesn't burn. And it can kill an entire room in under a minute without anyone realizing they're in danger. Here's the trick. Nitrogen isn't poisonous. It just isn't oxygen. Flood a space with it, and it shoves the oxygen out of the way. Your body has no alarm for this. You have no sensor for not enough oxygen. You feel no burning, no choking, no smell, no warning. You just get quietly stupid, then dizzy. Then you're on the floor, and you never understood why. At a poultry processing plant in Georgia, they'd recently installed a new liquid nitrogen system, the ultra-cold liquid used for flash freezing food. During operation, it leaked. Liquid nitrogen boils into a huge volume of gas the instant it warms up, so even a modest leak floods a space fast. The oxygen got pushed out, and workers started dropping. No smell to warn them, no color to see, no taste. Just workers losing consciousness with zero understanding of the cause. And, again, co-workers rushing in to help and joining them on the floor. 6 people died in a room that to any human sense looked and felt completely fine. The mistake was upstream and boring, the way these always are. A newly installed system that wasn't properly set up, wasn't adequately checked, and had no reliable safeguards to catch a leak of a gas that gives you no natural warning whatsoever. They'd bolted in a silent, invisible, odorless killer, and trusted it to behave. And think about how ordinary this gas is. It's not some exotic chemical locked in a vault. It's the boring majority of the sky, which is exactly why it slips past every instinct you have. Your brain has spent your entire life treating nitrogen as background, as nothing, as the stuff that isn't trying to kill you. So when a room quietly fills with it, no ancient survival reflex kicks in. There's no held breath, no gag, no flinch. You'd walk into that room whistling. That's the whole horror of it. The deadliest thing here wasn't rare or dramatic. It was the most common gas on the planet, in the wrong place with nobody watching the oxygen level. If case 2 was sugar, this is its evil twin. Grain. And if the sugar plant makes you think, well, maybe they just didn't know, this one removes that excuse entirely. A corn milling plant in Wisconsin. Milling grain, like refining sugar, produces enormous quantities of fine dust. And grain dust, exactly like sugar dust, is explosive when it hangs in the air. Same physics, same danger, same recipe. Fine fuel plus oxygen plus 1 spark equals a building trying to become a bomb. And just like the sugar plant, the dust here had been building up over the years, coating the insides of the facility in a fine explosive layer. This is where the story turns from tragic to infuriating. This wasn't a secret. The dangers of grain dust are some of the oldest, most documented, most drilled into your skull hazards in the entire industry, and regulators had noticed. The plant had been inspected and cited by safety authorities multiple times over the dust problem. They were told, officially, on paper, more than once, the problems weren't fixed. Not properly, not permanently. The dust stayed. So the story writes its own ending, the same ending as always. A spark found the dust. The first blast shook the building, threw more dust into the air, and set off the chain, that rolling series of explosions marching through the plant, each blast feeding the next. 5 workers died. More were injured. The special sting of this one is that nobody can hide behind "we didn't know it was dangerous." They knew. It was written down. Someone with a badge came out and said, "Fix this," repeatedly, and the fix never came. 5 people died of a hazard that had a paper trail. And this is the pattern that should genuinely make your skin crawl. Because it's not unique to one plant. Grain dust explosions aren't some cutting-edge mystery that engineers are still puzzling over. Farmers have been dying in grain elevators for over a century. The physics is in every training manual. The fix is not exotic, it's cleaning, ventilation, and equipment that doesn't throw sparks into a fuel cloud. None of that is expensive genius. It's just work. Tedious, unglamorous, never finished work that produces nothing you can put on a spreadsheet and sell. So it slides down the priority list, quarter after quarter, until the dust does the math for you. The citations were basically letters from the future warning exactly how everyone would die. Nobody opened them in time. Some disasters happened because someone did something reckless on purpose. This one happened because of a cleaning procedure that, at the time, was considered totally normal. A brand new power plant in Connecticut was getting ready to come online. Before you fire up gas pipes, you want them clean, no debris, no junk left over from construction rattling around inside. And the method they used to clean the gas lines was called a gas blow. The idea is straightforward. You blast high-pressure natural gas through the pipes to scour out any debris and vent it away. Use the fuel itself as the cleaning agent. Read that again. Their plan to clean the pipes was to shove enormous volumes of natural gas, the same natural gas whose entire purpose is to burn, through the system and out into the surrounding area. Outdoors, indoors, wherever it went, and natural gas doesn't politely leave. It's lighter than air in the open, but it collects, it lingers, it pools in and around structures, filling the space with an invisible flammable cloud. So now you've got a construction site, full of workers, full of equipment, full of the ordinary sparks and ignition sources that exist anywhere people are building things. Slowly marinating invented natural gas. It's the kind of setup where you don't ask if it'll ignite. You ask when. It ignited. The explosion tore through the plant, killed 6 workers, injured dozens, and was felt for miles around. The blast was powerful enough to damage buildings well beyond the site. And here's the part that tells you how normalized the madness was. After this, the United States changed the rules. Deliberately venting flammable gas to clean pipes near people got recognized for the obviously insane practice it was. And the standards were rewritten. 6 people had to die for the industry to admit that cleaning pipes with a fuel air bomb was a bad idea. We've saved the worst for last. This is the one they teach in every safety course on Earth. The disaster whose name became shorthand for an entire category of failure. 167 people died on a burning platform in the middle of the North Sea. And it started with a piece of paperwork nobody read. Piper Alpha was an oil and gas platform, a self-contained metal island crawling with hundreds of workers, sitting on top of the very thing that would kill them. The tragedy began with something almost laughably routine. A pump needed maintenance, so it was shut down and taken out of service, and while it was open, a critical safety valve was removed for the work. Standard stuff. To keep everyone straight, they used a permit-to-work system, a formal paper trail where you log that a machine is out of commission and unsafe to start. Here is the fatal crack. The maintenance wasn't finished by the end of the shift. The pump sat there, missing its safety valve, effectively an open pipe. The permit recording this was filed, but it lived in a separate place from the permits the next shift was actually looking at. Shift change came. The new crew took over, and they did not know that this particular pump was a death trap with a hole where a valve should be. Then the other pump, the one still in service, failed. No problem, the crew thought. We've got a backup. Let's switch on the spare, and they turned on the pump that was missing its safety valve. Gas poured out of the opening. It found ignition almost immediately. The first explosion was only the beginning. The fire spread to where the platform received oil and gas from other connected platforms. And those other platforms, not understanding how bad it was, kept pumping fuel toward the inferno. The whole structure became a torch. Many of the men retreated to the accommodation block to wait for rescue, following the standard procedure, and were trapped there by smoke and heat. Some survived only by ignoring the rules and jumping dozens of meters into a freezing, burning sea. 167 dead. The root cause is the most famous failure of communication in industrial history. The permit-to-work system broke down. One shift, knew the pump was unsafe. The next shift didn't. That single gap in a paper trail, a message that never made it from one crew to the next, turned a routine maintenance job into the deadliest offshore disaster